Welcome to Check This Out, podcast for kids.
And their grown-ups, where we explore people, places, ponderings, and past moments from history that shape the world around us. My name is Amy Contreras.
And I'm Cece.
Today we are continuing our series on
Women Who Changed the World.
Today's episode is about one of the most famous suffragists in American history, Susan B. Anthony. But before I get too far into the episode and tell you all about Susan B. Anthony and why we think she's a woman who changed the world, I have a feeling a few of you have the same question that Cece has for me.
What does that word mean?
That's the question I was expecting. We've talked about suffrage before in some of our other episodes, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. A suffragist, quite simply, is a person, often a woman, who fought for women's rights to vote.
I remember hearing about that.
Now, the reason why we need to know what suffrage is and what a suffragist is and why this matters is white women didn't gain the right to vote in the United States until the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Black women weren't able to vote in the United States until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. If these facts ring a bell, it's because we talked about them in our episodes on Martin Luther King Jr. and Sojourner Truth, to name a few. Helen Keller was also a big suffragist. But before we get into all the details of the star of today's episode, Susan B. Anthony, we have two big favors to ask of all of you, our listeners.
First things first.
We are hoping you can do us a big favor. Please follow and like our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Audible, or wherever you're listening to your podcasts. A 5-star rating from you helps our podcast find more listeners. Our second ask is about spreading the word about Check This Out podcast for kids. Do you have 5 friends who you could share this podcast with? Maybe a teacher at school or someone you go to church with. We're loving all of our new listeners and we want to invite more to the party.
Do you think you can help us with that?
I bet they can. Thanks, friends. Now it's time to get into our episode all about suffragist Susan B. Anthony.
Listeners, keep your ears open.
Because at the end of the episode, we're going to recap some of the things we learned about Susan that you can continue to research on your own. You might not have learned about Susan B. Anthony in school yet, so right away we want to tell you a little bit about her to help you understand why we think she's a woman who changed the world. I'm going to hit you with a few factoids right out the gate so you understand the impact that this lady had on the world around her.
Here's a quick overview.
Fact number 1. Susan B. Anthony served as the president of the National Women's Suffrage Association from 1892 to 1900.
Fact number 2.
She worked with other famous suffragists and civil rights activists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton to fight for women's right to vote.
Fact number 3.
In 1872, before women were allowed to vote, she famously and illegally voted in the presidential election in Rochester, New York. She was caught, arrested, convicted, and fined, but she refused to pay the fine.
Good for her.
Fact number 4. Susan B. Anthony is one of many people credited with the creation of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote in the United States. But she died in 1906, 14 years before the law would change. Fact number 5. She spent time in her life fighting for the abolition of slavery. In 1856, she served as an American Anti-Slavery Society agent, making speeches, organizing meetings, and distributing pamphlets. She worked closely with Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison on these efforts. Fact number 6. She was a prolific author and writer. She co-authored a 6-volume collection of books called History of Women's Suffrage with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Matilda Jocelyn Gage.
She was a busy lady.
She was, Cece. Susan B. Anthony was an important woman in American history because she fought hard for the right for women to vote, which is why her role as a suffragist is remembered today. Because this episode is about suffrage, we're also going to talk about voting a whole lot. Listeners, why do you think it's so important to vote?
A.
Because it's something to do to keep you busy.
B.
Voting is when people choose their leaders and make decisions about their communities.
C.
Voting is something the men did, so the women wanted to be just like the men. If you said B, you're right.
Voting is a big responsibility.
Voting is when people choose their leaders and make decisions about their communities. Back when Susan B. Anthony was alive, women were not allowed to vote in the United States.
How unfair.
It was, and women wanted to vote. The laws that the elected officials created impacted them and their lives too. Not being able to vote made Susan B. Anthony really upset because she thought it wasn't fair that men could vote while women couldn't. She believed that everyone should have a say in their government, no matter if they were a man or a woman.
I like that.
One of Susan's key achievements was organizing a group of women who also wanted the right to vote. In 1848, she and her friends attended the Seneca Falls Convention, which was the first ever women's rights convention in the United States. There were a lot of suffragists there, not just Susan B. Anthony. We've actually talked about this convention in another episode of the podcast. Do you remember which one? If you said the episode on Sojourner Truth, you're correct. At this conference, the suffragists talked about how women should have equal rights, including the right to vote. This was a big deal because it was one of the first times people publicly discussed the idea of women having equal rights as men. It got a lot of attention and helped many other women start to think about their rights.
Will I get to vote when I'm older, Mama?
Absolutely, Cece. In the United States, the age to vote is 18, so you only have a few more years to go. But Susan B. Anthony didn't just fight for women's rights. Earlier in her life, she also fought for the abolishment of slavery.
Oh, that's important.
Susan B. Anthony was born in 1820 in Massachusetts. She grew up in a time before slavery was abolished and before the Civil War. She became active as an abolitionist at a young age, thanks to the influence of her father and her Quaker religion. Remember, abolitionists wanted to get rid of slavery, or abolish it.
That's important.
In 1945, Susan's family moved to New York, and her whole family became active in the anti-slavery movement. She was so active and vocal against slavery, there was even an angry mob that targeted her.
She sounds really brave.
She was, and she fought for what she believed in. In 1863, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucy Stone formed the Women's Loyal National League to press for an amendment to abolish slavery. Their goal became a reality when the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865.
Remind me what that is?
No problem. Ratification is when a governing body or a person signs a document making it official. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States officially abolished or got rid of slavery.
That makes a lot of sense.
Now, you might be wondering why Susan B. Anthony was so passionate about women's rights and the ability to vote. Let me tell you a little story. That's just one reason in a long line of reasons why she fought so hard for women's rights to vote.
I'm ready. Hit me with it.
In 1848, Susan B. Anthony was working as a teacher in New York and became involved in the teachers' union. During her time as a teacher, she discovered that male teachers received a monthly salary of $10. Do you want to guess how much money the women teachers made to do the exact same job?
$7 a month?
Nope. Female teachers only earned $2.50 a month to do the exact same job the men were getting paid $10 a month to do.
That's ridiculous.
Absolutely. But Cece, even with lots of progress since the time that Susan B. Anthony was alive, women are still often paid less than men to do the same jobs. People of color or underrepresented populations are also impacted by differences in pay for the same jobs. So we've made a lot of progress, but there is still more to do.
Got it.
I mentioned at the start of the podcast that Susan B. Anthony was once arrested for voting. Let me tell you a little more about that story. This significant moment in Susan's life happened in 1872. She decided to take action and vote in a presidential election, even though it was illegal for women to do so at the time. She was arrested for voting, which means the police took her away because she broke the law. Susan didn't let this scare her. Instead, she used her arrest to tell more people about the importance of women voting. She traveled across the country giving speeches and sharing her ideas with others to inspire them to fight for women's rights too. She had originally hoped to be assigned prison time.
What?
Yes, she wanted to be able to appeal the ruling and take her case to the Supreme Court, but the judge only charged her a $100 fine, which she never paid.
Wow, I love it.
Susan B. Anthony eventually met with President Teddy Roosevelt near the end of her life to discuss an amendment for women to vote. She also had many famous speeches and quotes during the course of her life. Here's one of my favorites. "It was we the people, not we, the white male citizens, nor yet we, the male citizens, but we the whole people who formed the Union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty, but to secure them, not to the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity, but to the whole people, women as well as men. And it is a downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty while they are denied the use of the only means of securing them provided by this democratic Republican government, the ballot." Susan B. Anthony, 1873. In addition to her speeches, she worked hard along with other suffragists to document the women's voting movement. She co-founded a paper called The Revolution with her good friend and fellow suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And from 1881 to 1885, Susan B. Anthony joined Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Matilda Jocelyn Gage in writing the 6-volume history of women's suffrage.
Was there anything she didn't do?
She was busy and worked hard until the end of her life for the rights of others. Susan B. Anthony was an abolitionist, a suffragist, writer, and speaker. Today, you can find her face on the U.S. dollar coin, stamps, books, and in museums across the world. But her work and views were not without their problems.
Like what, Mama?
Susan B. Anthony opposed the 15th Amendment, which provided votes to Black men, and it led her to take on racist views and have a narrow view of suffrage that focused only on white women. This is why another person that we've talked about on the podcast, Sojourner Truth, became frustrated with the white suffragists of her time. They prioritized getting the vote for white women only, not all women.
That must have been hard.
Although there was controversy about her approach and focuses, Susan B. Anthony was an important figure in the women's suffrage movement in the United States. She died on March 13, 1906 from heart failure and pneumonia at her Rochester home. Although she died before the 19th Amendment was ratified, because that didn't happen until 1920, the 19th Amendment is sometimes referred to as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment.
That is cool.
At the start of the episode, we told you we'd give you a few facts that you can continue to research on your own. Let's recap some of our favorite facts about Susan B. Anthony to wrap up our episode.
Fact number 1.
Susan B. Anthony was known for her efforts to secure voting rights for women, and she co-founded the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869 alongside her lifelong friend and fellow suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Fact number 2.
In 1872, Susan B. Anthony was arrested for illegally voting in the presidential election because women did not yet have the right to vote. After her arrest, Anthony traveled extensively, delivering speeches and organizing campaigns, which significantly raised the public awareness and support for women's suffrage.
Fact number 3.
Her legacy culminated in the eventual ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote, making her a key architect of this landmark change in American society. She met with President Teddy Roosevelt the year before her death to discuss a woman voting amendment, working for women's rights right until the very end of her life.
I learned something new today.
Me too. Now, before we finish this week's episode on Woman Who Changed the World, Susan B. Anthony, here's a quick poem we wrote about her. Born in Massachusetts in 1820, Susan B. Anthony fought for many. With eyes on voting equality, she took a stand for freedom and women's rights across the land. In 1851, her path intertwined with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, their fates aligned. For women's voices, they led the suffragist fight, determined to claim their voting rights. She wrote, spoke, and worked for women till she died. Her dream lived when the 19th Amendment came alive. When the 19th Amendment came to be, it was one step towards justice for you and me. Thanks for listening to another episode of Check This Out. Here at Check This Out Podcast for Kids, we know there's a lot of information and it can be overwhelming to find accurate information. This podcast is a tool for you to help you do something called citing your sources. As you get older and do projects for school, you'll learn that certain types of websites or information sources are not verified or don't have evidence and documentation to back them up. On Check This Out, we use verified sources to build the stories you hear about. Our sources for this week's episode are Encyclopedia Britannica, womenshistory.org, susanb.org, the National Park Service, the Smithsonian, and history.com.
Thanks for listening. See you next episode. Don't forget to subscribe.